1-833-288-3986.
What's stopping you?
Why do I need to confess my sins to a priest?
What's stopping you? This is Called to Communion with Dr. David Anders on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Well, a happy Thursday to each and every one of you. Welcome to EWTN's Called to Communion. It's a program for our non-Catholic brothers and sisters, geared toward them anyway. And we ask the question every day, what's stopping you from becoming a Catholic? If you're not Catholic, how would you answer that question? We'd love to hear about it. The number's 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. If you're outside the United States and Canada, we'd still love to hear from you. That number is 1-205-271-2985. And we'll even put you straight to the front of the line at 1-205-271-2985. And if you're not close to a telephone right now, you can always send us an email. That email address is ctc@ewtn.com. That's ctc@ewtn.com. I'm Jack Williams. Charles Beery behind the glass, spinning the dials, producing the program. Your call screener is Matt Gubensky, and Jeff Burson handling our social media efforts. So if you're watching us on YouTube or Facebook Live, you can type a question into the chat window, and it may find its way to us by the end of the program. And I'm sitting in today for Tom Price. I don't know if I mentioned that or not, but Tom is taking a long Labor Day weekend here, and alongside is David Anders. How are you?
Jack, I'm great. How about you?
I am fantastic, thank you.
Glad to hear it.
Got an email here from Mev. He says, I live in an assisted living complex. A very nice Jewish fellow has a Shabbat service every week. He's always asking me to come. Somehow I don't feel comfortable accepting. What do you think?
Well, it's up to you. There's no objection to your going. The only thing you can't do in a non-Christian religious service is you're not going to participate in putative rites of sacrifice to pagan gods. So that's really not at issue in a Jewish service. You're not going to take vows or something like that that would obligate you to things that are not appropriate for a Christian to vow, and that wouldn't be the case in this situation. And a large portion of the synagogue service is, of course, the reading of the Hebrew Scriptures. Now, granted, they give a different take on them, but this is what St. Paul did when he was in his own personal ministry. He would always start with the synagogues, and he would go participate in synagogue service and then reason and talk to the Jews, and they would have their differences about what they thought the Hebrew Scriptures meant, and they would normally part ways, sometimes amicably, sometimes not. I would really aim for the amicable these days, right? But there's nothing, and Pope John Paul II actually was, I think maybe the first pope since St. Peter, but very conspicuously a pope to attend synagogue services and signal the deep continuity and mutual appreciation of Jew and Christian. So that's not an inappropriate thing to do. Now, if he's going to invite you to his services, you could return the favor.
Again, wide open phone lines for you here at the beginning of the program. The number's 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. We have an anonymous email that says, our Bible study group in Minnesota is writing to you with another question. As a group of converts, reverts, crib Catholics, and Protestants, we sometimes come across Bible passages we disagree about.
I'll bet.
Yeah. But Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 4 is a bewilderment for all of us. Can you help?
All right. Let's just read the text. Genesis 6, 1 to 4. All right.
And I didn't see that there was a scripture citation when I started reading the email.
So, when man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw the daughters of men were attractive. Ah, yes, okay. The old Nephilim passage. Yeah, okay. So how to understand that? There really are only a couple possibilities, right? And how you take it has a lot to do with not only the narrative itself, but really how you think about the whole process of biblical interpretation. So there are some people who think that the text should be taken quite literally, that angelic beings copulated with human females and some kind of, bizarre hybrid offspring was the result. Now, that is both metaphysically and biologically impossible. So we know for sure, and we can know this without reference to anything else other than reason, philosophy, good theology, and science, that's not what happened historically. Angels did not copulate with physical human beings to produce hybrid offspring. Angels don't have bodies.
Creates a problem.
Okay, so that is not what happened. All right. Now, there are two ways out of that. All right, there are two ways around that. One way is, okay, so it's not talking about angels. That is by far the dominant view in the tradition. All right. Something else is in view. And there is, some traditions of Catholic exegesis would say this is somebody like maybe the children of Seth. All right. There's some other line of human beings that's implicated here. That's the dominant view. Now, there's so many other things about Genesis 6 that are clearly not to be literally understood. And I don't think any Catholic exegete today feels obligated to believe in an actual catastrophic worldwide flood that killed every species on the planet except for those on Noah's Ark. St. Peter looks at this passage in 1 Peter chapter 3 as an allegory for Christian baptism. That this is a picture of the soul. What happens in the flood? Well, there are sinners, and God purifies the world with water. He washes away sinners with water and preserves the righteous. Well, that's not hard to see that as a picture of Christian baptism. I have sin within my members. God purifies and washes away that, and leaves the gold behind and purifies it by grace. And I've run out of time to finish that thought, but that's probably enough.
833-288-EWTN is our toll-free number, 833-288-3986. It's EWTN's Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders.
The most original Catholic content is on EWTN Radio.
This is Ryan Penny, and this week on The Catholic Sphere, my panel of social media experts discuss EWTN's role on social media and how easy it can be for you to evangelize on the web.
The Catholic Sphere, Sunday afternoon, 2:30 Eastern on EWTN Radio.
Archbishop Cordileone talks about the National Catholic Register.
The register's content is so critically important in the society we're living in now. There's an absence of the practice of religion in public life. So all the more important is it for people to be reading the register so that they can acquire more understanding of our Catholic faith. I've appreciated the catechetical benefits of the content of the register. It presents very clear Catholic teaching in a way that is easily digestible.
To get 6 free issues, order online at ncregister.com/radio or call 800-421-3230 and mention code RADIO. That's ncregister.com/radio or 800-421-3230 and mention code RADIO. Call or click today. The National Catholic Register. Read faithfully.
It's a Thursday edition of EWTN's Call to Communion. You don't miss the latest political and cultural reporting and analysis on topics of interest to Catholics and people of faith everywhere on the world over with Raymond Arroyo, and you can get news from the world over right in your email inbox every week. Simply sign up by visiting EWTN.com and click on subscribe. Some open phone lines for you at 833-288-EWTN. That's 288-3986. First up today is Dawn, a first-time caller in Cleveland, Ohio, listening to The Rock. Dawn, you are on with Dr. David Anders.
Hello?
Hi, Dawn. Go right ahead with your question today.
Well, I'd like to know, when am I going to be considered a Catholic? I've been baptized. I've been trying to study all the things, and been listening.
Yeah, sure. Dawn, let me ask you a question. When you were baptized, were you baptized in the Catholic Church?
Yes, I was.
Okay. Did you receive your first reconciliation or first communion?
No, I never had a confirmation or communion.
Okay, so let me tell you what the situation is. There are, to initiate somebody, that's, you move somebody from being outside to being inside. There are really 3 steps in being considered fully Catholic. 3 sacraments of initiation: baptism, communion, and confirmation. And so a person who is baptized has already received the first sacrament of initiation into the Catholic Church. So in a sense, now be very careful, hear what I say. In a sense, in an extended sense, you are already Catholic. But you have not become fully initiated into the Catholic faith. You need the other sacraments of initiation. You need to go to communion and go to confirmation, be confirmed. Now, in order to do that, you need to go through a process. And in most parishes, the process is that you will be asked to do some learning of the Catholic faith. And usually there's some classes you can take. And you can ask, they're called RCIA or OCIA, the Rite of Christian Initiation, or the Order of Christian Initiation for adults. Probably that's what the priest will ask you to do, is to join this class, take some classes, so you know the faith that you're going to profess. And then generally at Easter time, you would be admitted to the other sacraments of initiation, to First Communion and to confirmation. So that's what you need to do. So I would find the parish that you would like to go to, and you can call up the church secretary and say, look, I was baptized Catholic, but I didn't have my other sacraments, and I'd like to get all my sacraments and really begin to live a Catholic life, and they can walk you through the process and get you plugged into the system.
Thanks, Don. We appreciate the phone call. 833-288-EWTN is our toll-free number. 833-288-3986. Steve is watching us on YouTube today in the great state of Maine. Steve, you're on with Dr. David Anders.
Yes, hello. My question is, how can a person even consider becoming a Catholic if the person doesn't have a Catholic church near them and is not actually able to get to a Catholic church?
Oh, sure. No problems at all. Well, I say no problems. Slight problems, but not insurmountable problems. You live in some Catholic diocese. I don't know which one, but you are a member of, well, you're not a member, you live within the geographic boundaries of some Catholic diocese. Wherever that diocese is, you can simply call the chancery offices, which is the diocesan offices, and you can say, look, I am not able to travel. I'm disabled. I don't have transportation, not close to a parish, but I would like to be received into the Catholic Church. And can somebody help me? Can someone make arrangements to do this? And you could also try the closest parish. It might be 100 miles away, but you could still try the closest parish. Now, if they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, the diocese or the parish will make arrangements for you. I mean, this is what the church is supposed to do, is to go to the margins, and the people who are the least advantaged are supposed to go to the top of the totem pole in terms of priorities. That's the way Jesus did it, and that's how he's instructed the church to behave. And so here's what that might look like in your case. So perhaps a priest, maybe a deacon, maybe somebody else would be sent as an envoy from the priest to come out there and speak to you, find out your situation, maybe instruct you in the Catholic faith, or give you some material to read or watch on the Catholic faith. And then a priest could come out to your residence or some other location that would be accessible to you and actually initiate you into the Catholic faith, baptize you if you need to be baptized, commit you to Holy Communion and confirm you in the Catholic faith. And you would, of course, be dispensed from the obligation to go to Mass every Sunday if it is physically impossible for you to do so. But you would be sacramentally joined to the Catholic Church, and you could begin to live a Catholic life, at least in your life of prayer and your interior life, and associate yourself with the Church and the life of the saints and the intercession of the saints, and become a member of Christ's body. And then perhaps, you might make it to, maybe you can only get to Mass once a year. That would probably not be too much of a stretch, I imagine. So where there's a will, there's a way. Now, I will give you this counsel. If this is your desire, if at first you don't succeed, try again. Because parishes are often rather strapped for staff and time and resources. And I hate to say it, you ought to go to the top of the totem pole, but as a matter of just practicality, that might not happen in some particular instance. And so if you try a parish and you don't get somebody who's willing to come out to you, I'd try the next one on the list. And I'd just be persistent, and we'll find somebody to help you and work with you. And you might call the network, Viewer Services, and see if they've got somebody that could direct you to the closest parish or other diocesan official in your neighborhood.
Thanks, Steve. We appreciate the call. 833-288-EWTN is our toll-free number. We've got a couple of open phone lines for you at 833-288-3986. Next stop is the great state of Nebraska, where Emily, another first-time caller, is listening on Spirit Catholic Radio. Emily, thanks for holding. You're on with Dr. Anders.
Hey, Emily. You're on the air.
Go right ahead, Emily.
Uh-oh.
We might have but she's driving through Nebraska, and we may have a weak cell area there. So we'll put Emily on hold and come back to her in just a second. Let's try Kevin. He's in Dallas, Texas, watching us also on YouTube today. Kevin, you're on with Dr. Anders.
Hi, Dr. Anders. I had a question regarding the issue of sufficient and efficacious grace. I've read Catholic writers who said that God will deny efficacious grace due to justice if people are stubborn or maybe want to keep on sinning and plan to repent later. And I just had a question. Is that issue of denying efficacious grace due to justice, is that something that would be considered that God would do for the rest of the person's life, and is it considered equivalent to the unforgivable sin?
Okay. Yes, I understand the question. So the question presumes a false understanding of efficacious grace, okay? Because the way you have framed the question suggests that God is making an active determination temporally to give or deny efficacious grace based on something that he sees in the human soul. That is absolutely not efficacious grace, okay? It is absolutely essential. It's integral to the doctrine of sanctifying grace that the gift of sanctifying grace initially cannot be merited. Cannot be merited. And so, here's a picture that some people have that's dead wrong, all right? And it's actually the heresy of semi-Pelagianism. This is how they think. So if I do the best I can, God will respond by giving me grace. That is wrong. That is not the teaching of the Catholic Church. That is the heresy of semi-Pelagianism. It's more like this. If I'm doing the best I can, and that is meritorious, it is only because God has already antecedently given me grace. Grace is God's sovereign decision. It is not a response to anything in the human person. Now, grace that saves us. Now, the apparent arbitrariness of grace. Well, if that's the case, if grace is up ultimately to God's sovereign discretion, doesn't that make God seem arbitrary? So, to answer that dilemma, there was a school of thought that's not dogma, it's just theological speculation, particularly associated with the Jesuits and a theologian named Molina, and it's called Molinism. And Molinism took the view that God grants grace not as a response to some moral effort on the part of the human person, but rather in response to his foreknowledge of the free action that some soul will take with grace if given. So it's a hypothetical that God is making a determination to give grace based on his knowledge of a hypothetical future condition, not an actual condition within the soul at this moment. And that way, so the theory goes, grace is both completely within God's sovereign control, it's not something merited by the human person, and yet it's not something that's totally arbitrary either. So that was the Molinist or the Jesuit position. Now, the Dominicans, who are really responsible, the Thomistic tradition is the one that's really responsible for this language of efficacious grace, took another line, and they said, no, you Jesuit semi-Pelagians, you. The position you take really is just a nuanced semi-Pelagianism because it's still a response to some human activity, and therefore it really vitiates the doctrine of God's sovereignty and grace. And so, but what they both have in common, and listen, both of these positions are allowable. You can be a Catholic and hold either one. You can hold the Thomist position, which is that God grants efficacious grace, that is, grace that actually gets the job done, for some reason known only to him, that has absolutely no connection to our intrinsic worthiness. Or you can hold the Jesuit position, which is that God grants efficacious grace or saving grace based on his knowledge of future counterfactuals. Either one of those is allowable. But in neither case is the decision to give grace based on any assessment of human merit. So that's the answer.
Okay, we're going to go back to Emily now. I think we've got a clearer phone line for her now. Emily from Nebraska, are you there?
Yes.
All right, go ahead.
Okay, I have an evangelical Anglican cousin, and I'm a Catholic convert, and we have discussions, and she can rattle off book, verse, chapter, and stuff and I'm kind of caught in a quandary. But in a discussion one time, I told her, I said, well, if we're both for Jesus Christ, then you serve him your way and I serve him my way, and we may just have to disagree. And I thought there was a chapter in Matthew where the disciples were with Jesus, and they didn't like the way some guys were teaching, but I thought Jesus made the comment that if they are for us, then they're not against us.
Yes.
And so I shared that with her. I didn't know if that was like the right thing to do, or I felt like it was at the moment, and so I shared it with her. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, sure. So look, when you're dealing with people, there's never an always right thing to do and an always wrong thing to do. I mean, these are prudent decisions about how do we show charity and love in the moment. And I think for what you're trying to accomplish, this is a lovely sentiment and a very appropriate thing to say. And there's a passage in Mark chapter 9, also a passage in Luke chapter 9, where Jesus says, don't stop this guy, because whoever is not against us is for us. Even if he's not part of the company of the apostles and he's not part of our visible group, as long as he's not acting against us, and he's sort of, distantly connected by some faith, then he's still for us, and that's great. So that would be a very Catholic way of looking at Protestant spirituality. As a Catholic, we think of all baptized people as Christians, whether they're fully Catholic or not, and so we call them separated brethren. They share elements of truth and sanctification with us, but they differ on some matters. We pray for that full unity in the faith, but in the meanwhile, we can still celebrate those things that we have in common. Now, I don't want to leave it there, however, because you spoke about your cousin's ability to quote book, chapter, and verse, and maybe she knows the Bible better than you do and kind of puts you back on your heels a little bit. I'd like to give you some resources to strengthen your will and your backbone when you have the verse, chapter, and so forth thrown at you. And here's a couple things that you might think about sharing or saying. One is a question to put to your cousin, and the question is this: did Jesus make any provision for handing on the Christian faith, yes or no? Did Jesus himself make any provision for handing on the Christian faith? Because your cousin's behavior would indicate that the way we hand on the Christian faith or adjudicate its contents is by reference to the Bible alone. The Bible is the point of reference for determining the content of Christian faith. Is that true? Is that really the point of reference? And if so, did Jesus convey the Bible to us as our rule of faith? And I'm talking about the whole 66 books that she's quoting, the Protestant canon of the Bible from Genesis to Revelation. Did Jesus give us this document or this collection of documents as our rule of faith? Just sit with that question. Let her think about it and give you, before she answers, and give it 120 seconds of silence while she thinks about it. Now, we're going to have 120 seconds or more of silence coming up in a second. Don't we have a break coming up in just a minute, Jack? When we get back from the other side of the break, I want to talk about what you say after that 120 seconds of silence.
833-288-EWTN is our toll-free number, 833-288-3986. It's EWTN's Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders.
Are you ready to spread your wings? Wings is the weekly newsletter that's packed with exclusive news, program information, features, and updates of all that's going on at the Global Catholic Network. To sign up, go to EWTN.com, click subscribe, enter your name and email address, and you'll start getting your wings every week. Get your wings today. It's the weekly newsletter from EWTN, the Global Catholic Network.
Want to be notified when Called to Communion goes live on Facebook? Follow EWTN Radio's Facebook page and click the bell icon to be notified.
The wisdom of Mother Angelica.
One time I came home from the office and I said to my grandmother, who had 11 children, opened up the saloon at 5 o'clock in the morning, raised 11 kids. I said, boy, I was nervous today, Grandma. She looked at me and she said, what are nerves? I looked like she was something from another world, and I said, huh? She said, what are nerves? Oh, I said, forget it, Grandma. I gave her a kiss on the cheek and I said, you'll never know. And she didn't. She took the present moment and she raised her kids and helped my grandfather in the saloon. And they lost everything in the Depression. She took that in her stride, and she was a holy woman. That's holiness, see?
For more information on Mother Angelica, visit Religious Catalog at EWTNRC.com.
Want to share your love for the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist?
Join us tomorrow on Take Two with Jerry and Debbie
On most of these EWTN stations.
Now back to Call to Communion.
It's EWTN's Call to Communion here on a Thursday. We're talking with Emily in the great state of Nebraska about some good ways to evangelize her cousin who likes to go to chapter and verse when they're having these discussions. And you have suggested that she ask if the Lord Jesus Christ provided a mechanism for transferring the faith, and let her chew on that for a minute with some silence. And then when the silence is over, Emily might want to say what?
Absolutely. Thank you. So if Jesus provided us with a mechanism, some provision for handing on the Christian faith, your Protestant friend typically acts like that mechanism is the text of the Bible. There's a problem with that, however, and that is there is no record of Jesus ever indicating that the Bible as such is the rule of faith or the means for transmitting Christian doctrine. In particular, this is extremely conspicuous with respect to the texts of the New Testament themselves, none of which had been written at the time of Jesus, and there is no evidence whatsoever at all that Christ gave any instruction that such documents should ever be written or hold any special status within the church. So someone who quotes the New Testament as their authority for Christian faith has an immediate problem, and that is that God did not tell them to do that. Now, if it's not the Bible, did he give any other means for transmitting the Christian faith? And we actually do have a record of that. Jesus said to his apostles, the 11, "Go into all nations, make disciples, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and I will be with you to the end of the age. And whoever hears you hears me, and whoever rejects you rejects me." Christ established authorized individuals, gave them a mandate to hand on his oral teaching and ritual, and a promise of divine assistance, that he would be with them, and whoever hears them hears him. Now, that actually mirrors or reflects the structure of the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church understands itself to be, in continuity with those apostles, handing on the oral teaching of Jesus in perpetuity from the first century until now, relying on his promise that the gates of hell would not prevail. So on the face of it, the Protestant rule of faith cannot be found in the teaching of Jesus, and the Catholic rule of faith can be found in the teaching of Jesus. So if you're going to quote chapter and verse to me, we need to establish whether that's the proper way to establish Christian faith. Now, let's ask another question. This Bible that you're quoting, especially the New Testament, but really the whole thing, if it wasn't commissioned by Jesus, where did it come from? And you say, well, the apostles wrote it. Oh, yeah, how do you know that? How do you know that? Well, it says on the title of the book, here's Mark. Doesn't say it in the text. That ascription to Mark actually is a product of sacred tradition. How do you know it's these 27 books as opposed to 25 or 29 or 35 or 2? Why these books? No inspired table of contents in the Bible. And in fact, different Christian groups have come up with different lists. How do you know you have the right one? Again, we know we have the right list because of Catholic tradition. It's Catholic tradition that compiled and promulgated these 27 books as the New Testament. Do you trust Catholic tradition? Oh, no. Well, then you can't trust that you have the right books, or that they are of apostolic origin, or that they're even authoritative. So you got to have Catholic tradition to even get to the Bible. Here's another question for you. So we're up to 3 questions now. Next question is, when interpreting the Bible as your rule of faith, how do you know the difference between a dogma and an opinion? At this point, the Protestant says, do what? What's a dogma? Well, it's an essential. It's something that all Christians have to believe. An opinion is something on which Christians could disagree. How do you know the difference between dogma and opinion? So say you and your friend are both reading the same Bible, and you come to a disagreement. You don't agree on what it means. How do you know whether that disagreement is substantive or not? Is it a disagreement that you can tolerate, or is it a disagreement about which you should split and divide fellowship? How do you know with certainty that the disagreement amounts to a question of dogmatic significance? How do you know that it's a dogma or an opinion? Now, usually here, the Protestant will give a kind of knee-jerk intuitive response and say something like, well, if it pertains to salvation, then it's essential, and if it doesn't, then it's not. Oh, how do you know it pertains to salvation? That's just semantics. You've just changed the terminology, but you've refocused it back. You've just restated my problem. How do you know that it's something that pertains to salvation? And then they'll usually come up with another tautology, another truism. Well, it has to have to do with, all right, how do you know that principle? The truth of the matter is there is no way to answer that question. There's no way to distinguish dogma from opinion without an interpretive authority. So a Catholic has that. A Catholic can say, well, the Trinity is a dogma. And whether or not God grants efficacious grace on the basis of his knowledge of future counterfactuals is not a dogma. And I know that because the Church says this is a dogma and that's not. Apart from the authority of the Catholic Church, or at least some external agent that can adjudicate these things, there's no way to distinguish dogma from an opinion. So 3 questions for your Protestant friend. Did Jesus give us a rule of faith? Did he make provision for handing on the faith? And if so, what was that? 2, how do you constitute the Bible? How do you know you have the right list of books in their apostolic provenance? And on what authority do you make those declarations? And 3, in questions of interpretation, how do you distinguish dogma from opinion with certainty? Now, interestingly, in the history of Protestantism, Protestants have given very different answers to that last question about dogma and opinion. And different Protestant groups have listed different dogmas. I'll give you an example. In the 16th century, all Protestants believed that the nature of Christ's presence in the Eucharist was a question of dogmatic significance. Salvation depended on it. They didn't agree on what it was. They had different doctrines of the Eucharist, but they all agreed that if you disagreed with them on the Eucharist, you were going to hell. Luther thought that, Calvin thought that, Zwingli thought that. Today, almost no Protestant holds that. Almost no Protestant would think that the nature of the Eucharist is a dogmatic question that is absolutely essential. Catholics still do, but Protestants don't think that. What happened between the 16th century and today that all Protestants gave up the doctrine on the Eucharist as a matter of essentials? What happened is that 500 years of disagreement eroded their confidence in their ability to answer the question.
Thanks, Emily. We appreciate the phone call. We hope that helps you out today. Wide open phone lines for you at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. You know, there are certain towns in America that are just fun to say, and places you think just by saying them, man, I'd like to live there.
Yes.
One of those for me is Walla Walla, Washington.
That's a
I
mouthful.
love
It is.
the alliteration of Walla Walla, Washington. We've got a great affiliate there, Holy Spirit Sanctifier Catholic Radio in Walla Walla, Washington, celebrating, this is amazing, 21 years on the air as an EWTN affiliate. Congratulations to Rod and Kimberly Fazzari and their team at KHSS 100.7 FM, bringing listeners in Walla Walla, Washington, solid EWTN Catholic Radio for 21 years. Again,
Now,
wide open. Go ahead.
You're from Iowa, right?
No, I am a native St. Louisan.
Oh.
My late wife, Susie, and I spent 12 years
You were
Des
in
Moines.
Iowa. Okay, well, you know, did you know, speaking of funny names, there is a town in Iowa called Pope Joy?
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of interesting towns in Iowa.
Right.
In
There's also
fact-
Bluegrass, Iowa.
Yeah. I went back to the Quad City area, not even the Quad City area, north of there in the Cedar Falls, Dubuque area, and to speak at a pro-life event a while ago, several years ago now, and I knew that I was in Iowa. I flew into the Quad Cities, and I'm driving north on a 2-lane highway, and I knew I was back in Iowa when I saw a red-tailed hawk sitting on a sign that told me how many miles I was from Maquoketa. We got an email here from Joe in Houston, Texas, and he says, I'm an Episcopalian, but I listen to your show regularly on the Guadalupe Radio Network. You've had several discussions about purgatory, and sometimes I find myself wondering whether purgatory actually exists. Almost invariably, while I'm thinking of that topic, the memory of someone who has died comes to my mind. Rather than dismiss the thought, I usually pray something like, Lord, I don't know if purgatory exists, but if it does and this particular person is there, please help them learn whatever he or she needs to learn, cleanse them of sin, and speed them on their way. Do you think a prayer like that, coming from a non-Catholic doubter, has any effect on the person in question?
Yeah, I do. I really, really do. And I think this is a fantastic prayer. And it reminds me of the prayer of the Father to Christ, who said, Lord, I believe, help me in my unbelief, right? And look, I've prayed prayers like that all the time. You know, you get confused on something, you feel alienated, doubtful, you know, despairing, whatever, and you're like, God, I have no idea what's going on here. I don't know. I'm completely in the dark. You know what's going on here. I don't even know what to ask here, God. Just, I'm in. And I think there's a lot of that in the Bible. And is that prayer worthy? Of course it is. I mean, it's exemplified for us in the Psalms. And I don't think God would put that in the Psalms. That wouldn't be constitutive of Israel's prayer life if were not a valid prayer.
Very good. Next stop is the great state of Kentucky. Kevin, another first-time caller, is watching us on YouTube. Kevin, thanks for calling. You're on with Dr. Anders.
Hi. Thanks so much for having me, and it's great to meet both of you. My question, and so I suppose if the prompt is what's stopping you from being Catholic, my answer is the thing that stops me from being Catholic is Aristotelian thought, kind of at large, but if I was going to pick something in particular, it would be hylomorphism and then also like teleology. So I just don't believe that forms exist, like matters and forms, not in the way that Aristotle did. And I just also don't believe that teloi exists, like in teleology.
Sure. Yeah, I really appreciate the question. It's a great question. I have a lot of things to say about it. One is that I'm sure you know that Aristotelianism is not the only philosophical paradigm to be extant within Catholic tradition. By far and above Aristotelianism, for the first 1,000 years of the Christian Church, Neoplatonism was a much more important metaphysical matrix for Christian thought. And in fact, most of Catholic mystical theology, even to this day, Platonizes whenever it does metaphysics. And so maybe you don't like Platonism either, I don't know. But my point is that the Church is not wedded to one philosophical system. And in John Paul II's encyclical on Faith and Reason, Fides et Ratio, he makes that point explicitly. He says, faith and reason are both necessary for the life of faith, and he doesn't limit the life of reason to a particular philosophical tradition, and casts casts the net very, very widely. It actually draws even on the patrimony of the Eastern world, as well as the Western philosophical tradition, as open game, open season for Catholic philosophical speculation. So you're not wedded to Aristotelianism if you become a Catholic. Now, that being said, a lot of times when people object to elements of Aristotelianism, and there are clearly things about Aristotelian philosophy that are just dead wrong. I mean, Aristotle's zoology and his cosmology leave an awful lot to be desired. He made some serious mistakes in natural science. It's not usually holomorphism that people object to, and the idea that there are natures that are discoverable rationally really lies at the basis of the modern scientific enterprise. The idea that there is some regular constant that I can establish that would differentiate phenomena one from another, and that they can be classed and predicted. That really is how modern science operates. And things that don't fall into those kind of categories are the sorts of things that we don't consider to be viable topics of scientific analysis. The way I understand Aristotelian forms, as opposed to Platonic forms, is that there is a structural functional organization that constitutes an entity as being the kind of thing that it is. And it's the sort of thing that we would try to seek and elaborate and determine through scientific investigation. Do I insist that you hold that to become Catholic? No, and that's not necessary. Now, there is, because of its place within the tradition, there is some Catholic doctrine that will be articulated in Aristotelian terms, like the doctrine of transubstantiation, for example. But one is not obligated to believe in the Aristotelianism merely in the dogma of the real presence that's articulated in Aristotelian terminology. But I would invite you, before you throw the Aristotelian baby out with the philosophical bathwater, that maybe you give it another shot, because, and I say this not so much as a Catholic, as just someone who is deeply indebted to the entire Western philosophical tradition. Someone who does a pretty darn good job of defending Aristotelianism in its Catholic articulation is the philosopher Edward Feser. A couple of books by Feser you might find interesting. One, his book on Aquinas, which is just called Aquinas, is an excellent introduction to Aquinas' philosophy in its Aristotelian context. Another one, a much more polemical book that, not for the faint of heart, is The Last Superstition, which brings Aristotelian philosophy to bear on questions of contemporary social issues, but particularly atheism, the new atheism. Anyway, so that's what I have to say.
Thanks so much. We appreciate the phone call. Be sure to join us. What is one of the most efficacious, if not the most efficacious activity educationally you can engage in with small children?
The most efficacious educationally, reading to them is pretty high on my list.
That's it, right there. That's number one by far, reading to them. One of the oldest programs in Catholic radio is one of my favorite programs in Catholic radio, and it's Stories from the Heart with Sandra McDevitt, and Sandra basically reads you stories.
I like that.
And, oh, buddy, I'm telling you what, I can't tell you how many times I have sat in the garage with the car running, for 10 minutes because I wanted to hear the end of Sandra McDivitt reading the story before I went into the house when I got home. And you can hear it at 9:15 Eastern Time right here on EWTN Radio. This week she discusses, what does it mean to be rich, and are we envious of others because they have more? So there's a story with a moral coming to you on Sunday morning,
Okay.
9:15 Eastern Time right here on EWTN Radio. Next up is Paul in Ukiah, California, listening or watching us rather on YouTube. Paul, you're on with Dr. Anders.
Hi, Dr. Anders. It is so nice to talk to you. I've had a chance, my wife and I, to read your book, and your radio program has been very influential in bringing her into the church. So I wanted to thank you for that.
Thank you.
But my question today is, I have a very wonderful niece who we were estranged with for some time, and most recently we've reconnected over the last couple of years. And she has recently told my wife and I that she is bisexual and that she is in a relationship with a woman. And before the holidays are coming up this year, she wanted to know if it was okay to bring her same-sex partner to family events that we would be attending together and to be affectionate together. And I am trying to figure out what is the loving and kind thing to do, how to speak truth, how also to figure out what the boundaries are, what the lines are as far as being loving and kind, but also speaking the truth. Now, my youngest child is 13. My other children are all older. But, I was reflecting that even if I had no children, I'd still want to be consistent and, speak the church's truth, recognizing that this relationship is just been rekindled in the last few years, and I don't have years and years of connectedness. So
Sure.
Any advice you have would be appreciated.
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate the question. And the children, I think, really are the most important issue here in my mind. And I'll tell you what I would do in this situation. I would not deliberately put my 13-year-old in a situation where they had to be uncertain about whether mom and dad approved of this kind of sexual activity. And even if I said ahead of time, well, I don't really approve, but, I'm going to sit here and benignly tolerate it and try to inoculate them in advance, I don't think that'd be effective, personally. I think the message would be, hey, keep your private religious beliefs to yourself, but in public, it is going to be the display of homoerotic affection that has the priority, right? Not the Catholic faith, not the Catholic understanding of morality, but what predominates here is this person's will to impose their affection as a public display on the rest of the community. That's what really has to control the situation, and we're going to buckle under and we're going to yield to that as if that's somehow right and normal, and our belief is a kind of aberrant position that we agree privately to keep to ourselves. I think that's the message that the child would almost inevitably imbibe. And this, I don't have to tell you what we're dealing with culturally as Catholics. We don't want to be bigots by any stretch of the imagination. And I want my children and everybody else's children who are Catholic to be so profoundly respectful and loving and compassionate to all people, regardless of whether or not they share a Catholic faith, regardless of whether or not they attempt to live a chaste life. But at the same time, I want my children to be able to respect their own bodies and the bodies of other people, the bodies that God gave them for the uses that God intended. And this is just such a sensitive time. I really wouldn't want to risk my children's sexual integrity, out of a kind of, misplaced sensitivity to the prerogatives of the homosexual rights agenda. Now, that being said, if the kids were not involved, I would take a more nuanced position, even as I think Jesus did, right? Christ went out of his way to scandalize the religious establishment by eating with people who were visibly, publicly sexually immoral. And eating with, of course, in the Jewish context was a profoundly intimate thing that had a religious significance far deeper than what we ascribe to it. This actually goes to questions of clean and unclean and the whole nature of of Jewish worship. And yet Christ didn't hesitate to go spend time with, share food with, be touched by people that the culture would have considered ritually impure, ritually unclean. And so I would make a prudent judgment about how far I'd be willing to go in fellowship, to reach out to somebody in love. But the question of the children here really, in my mind, sort of makes the decision for you at the family gathering level. Jack, you wanted to say something, I think, didn't you?
I did not.
Oh, okay. I thought you were gearing up to add something. That's my 2 cents worth.
Very quickly, we'll head to Kizzy in Portland, Oregon, another first-time caller watching us today on YouTube. Kizzy, just a couple minutes left with Dr. Anders. What's your question today?
Mine. I'm not Catholic, but here lately there's been a lot of talk about abortion and Roe and Ray being overturned and stuff. I can understand the views on about not having abortions and stuff, but there's one little piece that I'm kind of hung up on, and I'm everything I hear is not. It's about like an emergency abortion for saving the mother's life if there's, like a tubal pregnancy. What is the Catholic views on that?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate the question. So the Catholic position on ectopic pregnancy is actually fairly nuanced, and it's more nuanced than most people would think. What the Church says is that you can never deliberately kill another human being under any circumstance, no matter what the consequence might be, right? I can't kill one person to save somebody else. That's still murder, and that's still objectively immoral. However, there are times when I could engage in activity, the purpose of which is to save life, and the unintended, undesired secondary effect will be the death of another human being. And this goes to what's called the principle of the double effect. So there are certain forms of medical intervention, I believe, now don't quote me on this because I could get this wrong, it's a salpingectomy, is a procedure that is considered morally permissible by Catholic ethicists, where the entire fallopian tube or the segment affected by the pregnancy is removed. The ends are cut and sutured. Now, this procedure will result in the death of the fetus. But you see, it does not specifically target the fetus for destruction. I'm not killing the fetus to save the mother. I'm removing the fallopian tube to save the mother, and it will have the secondary unintended effect of saving the fetus, which, if I could surgically remove the fetus and transplant to the uterus, that's exactly what I'll do, right? So the fetus may die, may very well die, but my goal here is going to be save the life of the mother, and if possible, save the life of the fetus, but that probably won't happen. That's permissible, but direct abortion is not permissible.
Thank you, Kizzy. We really appreciate that phone call. Well, the hour has flown by. David, thanks so much for being so gracious with your time.
Thank you, Jack.
On behalf of our host, Dr. David Anders, our producer, Charles Beery, our social media maven, Mr. Jeff Burson, and our call screener, Matt Gubensky, I'm Jack Williams, sitting in today for Tom Price. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll be back at it tomorrow with a Friday edition of EWTN's Call to Communion with Dr. David Anders.
The most original and